Volume 6 C40. I still can't believe she left. The Queen was right, threaten what they have to protect, and you can lead them where you want. Vijay thought with no small amount of glee. He could feel the saliva already forming. He may not have been permitted to use humans as an actual food source, but they kept so much of it there. We'll feast for days. He stuck out his tongue and licked around the outline of his mouth and waited. The column of soldiers seemed to stretch from the city to the far horizon, an intimidating sight to be sure, with soldiers on foot and horseback in gleaming bright armor. But what was it she said? The long line makes it seem like there are more than there really are. It's a common strategy to hearten the soldiers and intimidate their enemies. They really do put a lot of thought into war here, Vijay mumbled under his breath. It was reluctant admiration, and on reflection, he considered, perhaps that is how they've held out for so long despite being weaker. It heightened his loyalty to his queen, if anything, with their knowledge and our strength. Albion will stand at the pinnacle of the world one day. The city before his eyes with its high, proud walls, like the many soldiers in expensive armor sparked his envy, kept his eyes focused on both while he reflected on the cluster of villages he lorded over before. From the eyes he felt behind him that all stared at the same things, he could feel he was not alone. The urge to simply attack was pounding in his chest, thrumming in his blood, but he held back, he waited. He had his orders. He obeyed. Night settled in, and still concealed in the distant woods, his forces waited. It took days for his reinforcements to arrive, and during that time, they watched, counted the guards, learned their shifts, how many were on the walls when the others slept, and waited for the signal. That signal was Olisar Dark. The dragon swept down from above out of the clouds, his silhouette visible only for an instant when set against the moon. No roar, no bellow, no bestial fury. Without those, Vijay realized something. Dragons are known for their fury and power, but when I watch the way it moves, graceful, like the way a fish swims through water. The broad body seemed sleek, the broad wings battered the air into hurricanes and the tail undulated, serpent-like at his back in deliberate motions, and just as the cries of alarm were going up from the city, the dragon hit hard. His claws raked over the wall, his body slammed against it, his tail lashed out and smashed against the proud walls of Kalincha. Human guards tumbled to their doom, falling screaming to the ground and buried amidst the rubble. Their dying screams hidden by the crashing noise so that they may as well have died in silence for all anyone knew. The walls crumbled in multiple places, gaps large enough for a dozen or more to walk straight through appeared and opened up multiple ways into the city. His first part done, the dragon jumped away, his wings beating at the air with force enough that several more armor-clad soldiers fought desperately, leaning into the wind the dragon made, gritting their teeth or clawing for something to hold onto. And most failed, falling backwards to die on the open ground, landing on the road inside their city. Their brains dashed against the stone before Vijay could even call for the attack. When he did, they moved at a quick step, not at a dead run over such distance, but their pounding feet were so many that the noise they made was a war cry unto itself. The alarm in the city went up in earnest. The warning bells were calling soldiers to battle, but their cries, Vijay could tell as he drew closer, were few. More common were the cries of terror. He detected what he now knew of as the cries of human women and children, and the cries of men who had no taste or experience with battle. Brave, but foolish, Vijay thought to himself as the desperate line of humans in armor lined up in short, deep rows to try to hold him and his forces back from the paths they now had into the interior. The human paladins were shouting the names of their martial arts, some of the squires on foot were doing the same. Arrows flew overhead and fell behind him. He smelled demi-human blood, and heard demi-human cries of pain as the volleys of the human archers continued to exact their price. The pace picked up, the quick step became a charge, the light jog became a dead sprint, and Vijay's axe came down, chopping not flesh, but wood from a long pike. His free hand grabbed another, lifted it, and with it, the man who held on and would not let go. His terror-stricken face was clearly visible to Vijay in the darkness. A bright light made it even easier mere seconds later as more magic was brought to bear. He brought the pike down in a low, sweeping arc, knocking humans out of their formations and opening the way in. A paladin in polished armor charged into the gap. Rolani of Kalincha will not let the city fall. The paladin cried out, and drew out a glowing white sword as he leapt toward Vijay. Kalincha will fall, let it or not. Vijay snarled and blocked the blow of his challenger. He hooked the sword in the inner curve of the axe and gave it a pull, only to freeze. The human did not budge. Strong, Vijay remarked. The human didn't seem to care for the praise. He pulled back, and for seconds the two were locked in a tug of war, straining their bodies and grunting it out as the fighting went up around them, swarms of demi-humans filling the gaps and taking on the badly outnumbered humans. The tug of war was broken when the sword was twisted and pulled away, and the two circled one another, each more wary of the other. They darted in at once. Vijay played to his height, bringing the axe down toward head, shoulders, and torso. But the human paladin, augmented by his martial arts, was avoiding them with the artfulness of a sparrow avoiding a hawk, striking back, playing to his height, and attacking Vijay at the waist, thighs, and calves, places difficult to defend. Vijay snarled as pain scored his body when the human drew first blood. The noise of humans around him was nearly gone, and at a glance, he could see why. This paladin is the last one here. He smirked. The demi-humans around him were already storming through the rest of the city. Fighting was clearly thicker farther away as the undermanned garrison tried to create choke points to make stands. It won't last. Vijay chuckled and leveled his axe at the paladin. Your city is already in the hands of the Queen of Frost, human. You are beaten, even if you are still alive. They were circling one another. The face of the paladin was twisted in wrath. He held firm, without trembling or fear, raising his white blade up to his shoulder and pointing the tip toward Vijay. Even if that's true, that doesn't mean you'll live to enjoy it. The paladin spat, and the little white blob made ripples in a puddle of mixed human and demi-human blood, and as if it were a signal mutually agreed upon, the pair charged again. The sword parried the axe parried the sword. The armor of the paladin took blow after blow from the axe, denting, cracking, and Vijay felt the wounds pile up on the thick hide of his body as his own blood stained his fur. There was no breaking apart, no retreat. The two stayed in striking range of one another, ranging back and forth, the lone combatant still present at the wall itself. The noise of fighting receded farther and farther away from where they stood, the screams of the population dying down as people died or hid. Fires began to spring up and paint the night with smoke enough that the full moon was hidden from view as if by all new clouds. Until at last Vijay failed to avoid a deep slash that cut into his thigh and brought him down to one knee, giving them for the moment equal height. The human paladin brought his sword up for the finishing blow, and Vijay dropped his axe and dove forward, under the guard, and grappled the human, catching him in an embrace, and landing a bite down at the joining of the paladin's neck and shoulders. His teeth crunched through the armor, and the coppery taste of blood and the sweet taste of flesh filled his mouth as he closed his jaw, and then pulled back, tearing the wound open and fountaining blood over Vijay's face and body, spasming for a few seconds as the body's life ran out, before the catman let go, and dropped the paladin into a heap on the ground. He swallowed what he took from the man's flesh, and licked his lips. They do taste good, Vijay thought, and then attempting to take one more step, he fell forward and crashed to the ground beside his opponent, unable to move again. Prat has fallen? Kalka gasped with dismay. How? Gustav went out and she stopped her sentence cold. Is he dead? She asked the messenger. The court was filled with the new nobility. The last word they had of Gustav was a victory that cut off the path of southern reinforcements, the expectation of a decisive battle to bring down Astraka, and end the invasion before any more damage could be done. No, my lady. I come from his army, the kneeling messenger said. He is besieging Prat now and has Duke Astraka trapped inside the walls. Sighs of relief went up. But Kalka's voice was not among them. She looked over to Kelit at her right hand beside the throne. Astraka has a reputation for martial cunning. He must have avoided General Montagna somehow. There's no certainty that he won't again. Your Majesty. You're not saying what I think you're saying, are you? Kelit's hand went out reflexively to touch the Queen's shoulder, her fingers giving it a subtle squeeze. No wonder the rumors went up, that looked flirty even to me. And I was a virgin until only a few weeks ago. Ines reflected on his newfound sagely worldliness for a moment. His mind again turned to the absent Albedo. She hadn't reached out to him, but he could feel her hidden hand nonetheless. Yes. Kalka answered with fierce determination, her slender hand forming into a fist on the throne. We have a substantial host here, and can raise even more. I want to go and reinforce General Montagna. We can put this runecraft equipment to the test. Ainz felt his heart practically sing. Nobody actually putting that to use has been a little frustrating. How can they want more of it if they don't really see it in action? Still, he glanced over to the Queen from where he sat at her left hand. Kalka, that is still dangerous, especially if you don't know what you're marching into. I will go with you. You called me here hoping for my magic, so let me use it, at least this much. She seemed at war with herself, her eyes darting back and forth from Kelet to her husband-to-be, and even down to the floor at her feet. Excess dependency on a foreign king for combat support was a dangerous thing for a monarch, but her doubt seemed to vanish over the passing seconds. Yes. I will accept your help, whatever you can provide me. Ainz, she said, and gave him a smile that showed her pearl-white teeth, and stretched out her left hand to cover the back of his right where it sat on the throne she had added to the Great Hall. Then I have something I have to do. Some magic to use, Ainz said and rose to his feet. He towered easily over the tallest of the nobles there, and in his mystic robes, he exuded power and authority. But inside, he had one clear determination above all else. I must get this finished. And go home. There is something I must do. Join me in your quarters when you're ready, he said with urgency, and made his way out of the hall before anyone could even ask. Mages. Kalka and Kelet said at once with a chuckle, and Kalka sighed when Kelet squeezed her shoulder one more time before the Queen stood up and began to identify nobles to lead her forces. Volume 6 C41. The problem with people who go by the book, is that other people can read it, Naya said while her demi-humans went down the far side of the hill. In principle, she erected hasty defenses in the form of crude walls the moment the distant army of Remedios came into view. Their by-the-book response was to hole up for a siege on a hill, and by contrast, the opposing army to besiege it and starve the enemy out. However, what Naya actually did was erect the crude wooden walls to hide the fact that her army was going back down the other side. The broad wildlands of the area were Naya's backyard for far too long, and taking her army through it was easy. Remedios did as Naya predicted. Her worn-out army spent most of the day erecting a camp at the base of the massive hill and getting ready for a siege. They were still not done when Naya lost sight of them. "She be there long, huh?" one of the young orc attendants asked her, and Naya could not keep her smile from being smug. "Oh yes. It takes a long time to establish one of those camps, then she'll have to lay smaller defensive positions at each side of that giant ass of a hill, and only then will they start to scout it. They won't figure out that it's empty for some time, and by the time they've figured out we've gone back toward Kalinsha." She rubbed her hands together a little. "I won't pretend I'm not enjoying taunting that bitch. The dead gods know she deserves it. I'm sure she hated every second of that chase, seeing my banner everywhere we burned out, and I'm sure Vijar has captured Kalinsha by now anyway." It left a warm feeling in the heart of the Queen of Frost. She could easily picture Remedios kicking over a fence in a fit of tantrum and temper, taking her anger out on her own people, screaming at scouts to find where Naya went. I wonder how many the elves will kill before word gets to her. Probably a fair few. Those have been showing up in dribs and drabs since their representative made his first appearance. The demi-human army had no real trouble with forest beasts, not in numbers and knowing where to go, and being aware of the easy paths to take over the range of territory. Naya led them back to Kalinsha in short order. The whole of her army cheered when they came within sight of the city. The blue claw banner fluttered proudly in the breeze above every tower, and demi-humans patrolled the walls with confidence and pride in every step or sliver. The yelling and happy dances were proof of their victory and helped their spirits take flight. Naya spread her wings out with a snap, ready the ambush. "I'm going to go meet with Vijar and congratulate him." She took flight without another word. Her army's cheering alerted the city, and so she was quickly spotted. She reached back behind her and scratched an itch on her lower back, and wore a contented grin as she sailed over the walls and headed straight for the administrative center. As she drew closer she made a mental note while looking at the open wall. "I need to make sure I have an upper-level entry to my palace so I can enter or leave by air." She finished the thought and landed with a snap of her wings at the base of the steps of the building. Seeing the Queen of Frost, the pair of bladers went down to their knees. "My queen," they shouted, and Naya hand-waved their formality away. "Yes, it's me, yes, we all made it." Her mood still at a peak, she flashed a winning, if fierce, smile toward the pair at the door. Behind her, she felt a few humans glancing at her, no, staring. She felt their fear, their hatred, their dread and loathing. But Naya did not look over her shoulder to dignify it. "Just get the door," she said, and the Bladers did as she bade, opening the thick brown oaken double doors for her, and not closing them until she was several paces within. The most convenient thing Naya found about Holy Kingdom fortifications and administrative buildings was their consistency. Whether you were in Prat, Hobans, or Kalincha, the layout was always the same. Nobody could ever be transferred somewhere new, and claim to be lost if they'd been in one of them somewhere else. So Naya found it easy to reach the main office of the building. She walked past the Blader guard, opened the door, and opened her mouth to greet Vijar. Only for her mouth to stay open. "Halisha?" she asked, stopping in mid-step as the former king of the Stone Spitters snapped to attention. His long white hair hung freely around his greenish stone-like body, his eyes were hidden as always, and for an instant he said nothing. Naya filled the gap. "Where is Vijar?" Halisha darted his eyes left and right as if to search for an escape, and counted his blessings that they weren't visible to his queen, before finally speaking up. "My queen, we have victory." He tried to put enthusiasm into his voice. Naya would have none of it. Out of the three great chiefs, Nazreen, Vijar, and Halisha Ankara, Halisha was the one with the greatest penchant for sadism. While he showed concern for his own, anything not his own, was fair game for Pain. It wasn't an endearing quality in the mind of the Queen of Frost, but his strength and courage made him useful as a fallback to Vijar. "I can see that. Is Vijar in? I need to know our losses. Remedios will probably do a forced march all the way back here and I want us to be ready." Naya pressed the matter, and Halisha's broad shoulders slumped. "Vijar is dead. A paladin killed him, though he also killed the paladin. I am sorry, my queen." Halisha's rough gravel voice didn't convey much in the way of empathy, but as Vijar was one of theirs, Naya picked up some of it anyway. "Our losses were few. We lost 300, and slew 10 times that number to take the city. Olisar Dark is away responding to Nazreen's request for ocean beasts to help feed the many prisoner laborers." Halisha explained further, and Naya went quietly to the nearest desk, pulled out a chair, and sat down, her happiness evaporating like water poured onto a blazing flame. "The one to kill him, was he skilled?" Naya asked the rhetorical question, already sure of the answer. "Very," Halisha acknowledged. Naya felt her heart tear in half. "I never had comrades when I was a human, now I get them and I lose a comrade to humans? If there are gods out there, when I die I have to ask them why they loathe me so much. What did I do? Why?" She raged in her head while keeping her voice calm. Her frozen breath came out in a steady flow, frost settling over some of the objects on the desk, and they slowly began to crystallize within accumulating ice. Naya finally stood up. "Prepare for a fight. When Remedios gets here, thinking I've taken the city, I will challenge her to a duel. If she accepts and I win, I will let our army surrender. If they do, we've won the East and we can take the prisoners home. But if we fight, and I lose? Do not surrender. She will have you all tortured and killed. Do whatever the hell you want to them, I don't care. Just protect our kingdom by any means necessary. Do you understand me, Halisha?" "Am I queen?" Halisha counted himself a male of great courage, but the breath that came from his queen was painful to be near, and the icy fury in her eyes, as if Halisha had taken Vijar's life himself, iced over his heart and killed the flame of his courage. Only murder lay in his queen's eyes. She went to the wall, backhanded it, smashing through the wood and stone, and scattering the debris outside. "There, that's better," Naya muttered, her wings spread out, and she took off again as fast as she had arrived in the first place. Halisha sat on his frozen chair, unable to truly follow orders until the terror that froze his soul over, finally began to melt away. Volume 6 C42. Having Nazarek find where Astraka was going proved even easier than Ainz expected. Demiurge expertly used the mirror of remote viewing and relayed the information to his master with a joyful heart. By the same token, dispatching a doppelganger as a messenger using a gate spell from out of sight proved just as easy. With that done, Ainz went to Kalka's private chambers. "I suppose they are to be mine as well." "Sort of." Ainz thought and shivered. "I wonder if Peroncino ever had sex. If he did, maybe that is why he was so obsessed with it." The feeling of her slender, strong thighs clasped to him, the arching body and shapely curves, the passionate kiss, and roaming hands as she gave herself over fully to his touch. No wonder overpopulation became a problem back home. Who wouldn't do this as often as possible? He thought ecstatically and caught sight of a stupid, goofy grin on his face in the mirror. He put his hand over his forehead and dragged it down to his chin. Calm down, Ains. I know you're new at this, but still. He swore under his breath and thought back to his many dreams of Albedo's body entwined with his, the prior night. Indeed, many prior nights, his dreams were more intense than ever. In the past, it had always been merely her body, but the last few? He recalled her face hovering over his, drawing in for a kiss, her whispered words in a throaty voice, "I love you, and no matter what you'd done, I'd have loved you anyway." The words lingered still in his mind, though his own sense of guilt was still present, thinking back to his confrontations with the Guardians and the Battle Maids. They all know, and nobody cares, I'm just the one who stayed, one among their creators. Would it really be different in Albedo's case? Has she really been right this whole damn time and I've been too dense to see it? He had his back turned when the door to Kalka's chambers opened and she entered alone. Locking the door at her back, she gave him a little winsome smile and a rare demure look, half away from him, half toward him, while reaching her hands behind her back. I see you know our customs. Ains said nothing for an instant. What the hell does she mean? He wondered, but not for long. I really am impressed. You must have learned everything about us, to learn that it is customary for royalty to enjoy a night of love-making, before riding toward a battle. Kalka's hesitation on the word wasn't lost on him, but she didn't hesitate in the unbinding of the back of her blue and white dress, nor did she hesitate to step out of it when only her long golden hair concealed her breasts from his eyes. Kalka, Ains said impulsively as he reached out to touch her. His hands fell to her hips, but her hands went to remove his robes. You don't have to pretend with me. She smiled a little bit up at his face. Objectively, he is the single most handsome figure I've ever seen. I can hardly believe he is a magic caster and not a warrior. If things were different? If I were different? She contemplated as his robes fell away. Maybe not, but it feels good to pretend sometimes, and I'm used to pretending. Kellett and I have loved each other for a long time, and we've both played pretend. So, let us pretend together for a little. Close your eyes, All-Father of Nazarick, Kalka said, and rose to her tiptoes. She didn't wait for him to obey, but put her fore and middle fingers above his eyelids, and dragged them down, closing his eyes for him. Now, pretend I am the woman you love more than anything in the world, and I will do the same. Though, you might have an easier time than I. Anything can go wrong in a war. We're lucky the Queen of Frost hasn't already taken Kalincha or reached here. So for now, because anything might end us both for all we know, let's pretend for a little while, and be happy, Kalka said in a throaty voice, and with his clothing fallen to the floor, and the warmth and heat of her body pressed against his own, he had no will to refuse her. Albedo, he thought, and kissed the Queen as they tumbled back into her bed, neither of them even once opening their eyes to end the game. Not until morning at least. They were awakened by a steady knock at the door, still entwined together, bodies slick with the proof of the previous night's passionate embraces. It was Kalka who pushed herself up and put her hand to his chest to shake him awake. My queen. All-Father. We are ready to march, Kellett shouted from outside the door. Ains stirred with only a little prompting, her hand on his chest. For a moment he wanted to whisper Albedo's name, but his eyes fluttered open in time to see the golden cascade, and not the inky black, and he knew the truth. The game of pretend is over. He told himself with an ache in his heart that he hadn't expected, and then forced himself to sit up. Very well, Kalka declared loud enough to be heard. We will require a bath first, and then we will go. I have taken the liberty of having the bath prepared in advance, Your Majesty. Kellett replied in a more subdued voice than before. Kalka sat up beside the man who would be her nation's new king. All I ask, she said quietly, is that you never do anything against her. If ever you grow jealous, as some men do, come to me. Do not hurt her. I promise. I swear it on my name, Ains declared as emphatically as she requested, and they were quick about preparing themselves. The baths of the Roblé Holy Kingdom were nice enough, simple large open pools, rounded rather than squared, and the water was not a hot spring, but rather just water heated by enchanted rocks that lined the stone pools. But as a man of Japan still, Ains found it more than refreshing. It was downright reinvigorating, and he felt his entire body relax into the water while the attendants scrubbed him. When I was a skeleton, the slime bath was suitable, but now that I have flesh, nothing beats hot water again. And there is something to be said for having an attendant. He groaned as the servant at his back scratched and scrubbed at Ains's broad back. I can't use the maids for this, but perhaps I could acquire a few from outside of Nazarick for this? It bore more thinking, but it was unimportant in the moment. He chose to simply enjoy the echoing noise of the splashing water and the sound of the scrubbing brushes grinding against his skin. It was nothing if not regrettable when the servants stood back, their bodies clad in white bathing robes that clung to their wet skin, bowed, and said, "The Allfather is now clean." Within the hour he was on horseback, trotting to the front of the ranks of 500 runecraft-clad soldiers of Queen Kalka, and another 100 of the soldiers of the Kingdom of Nazarick, armed in Yggdrasil equipment. Nothing topped here, but raising them to heights they could never have dreamt of before, and with them all, several thousand soldiers and paladins clad in the equipment of their holy kingdom. Queen Kalka was already waiting for him at the head, and her face was neutral, no smile nor frown, no looking around, no waving to the public. She wore a white breastplate armor painted bright blue with the symbol of her house in the center. Her dress, no longer formal, was something of a war skirt with many metal bands secured to leather that hung loose around her thighs. Without even guessing, Ains recognized that what she wore was enchanted, and unable to think of what else to say to the stone-faced queen he asked, "What spells are on your equipment?" That made her smile a little. She raised a golden eyebrow at him. "Always the caster, aren't you, Ains?" she asked, and he gave a polite smile in return before replying, "Professional interests don't change much. Another thing we have in common." She acknowledged and put a hand on her war skirt. "These are enchanted for luck, and my breastplate," she gave the center a little tap, "is resistant to piercing damage. If I take any blows at all, this is where it will be, where I am best protected." Clever. Ains acknowledged, and he meant it. Smarter players from Yggdrasil used similar tactics, maxing defense in one thing, and then doing everything they could to ensure that attacks would target that. It was considered a risky but advanced strategy for self-preservation, and mostly used by support players. The horn blew at their back and they began to lead their little force out of the gate. Kalka's face lost its pleasantness and became grave again, some of the color gone from her cheeks, and a barely disguised tremor to what skin of hers was visible. Ains was sure he was the only one who could see them. He leaned toward her ever so slightly and whispered to her as they passed beneath the portcullis, "Don't worry, everything will be fine, trust me." "What did you do?" Kalka asked, equal parts curious and commanding, her big blue eyes fixed on her future husband. Ains only gave her a knowing smile. "I told you to trust me." He then winked at her, and a breathy little laugh passed her lips. She inched her horse a little closer to his own. "All right then, keep your secrets," she said, and some of the color returned to her cheeks as they rode on. Volume 6 C43. Remedios' arrival back in Kalincha led to her howling like an angry she-wolf. How? How? She demanded to know as if anybody had the answer. She got around us and captured it. No, that was why our army seemed so small. Damn it. She swore again. Her hands grabbed at her dark brown hair and pulled, threatening to tear it out in clumps. The walls were manned with demi-humans, and even at a glance it was obvious, there are a lot of them. And worse, there are people in there. Remedios cursed and clenched her hand around the sacred sword, one of the kingdom's treasures, listening to the ringing bell of the city and the noise of various demi-humans taking up their battle positions. Her pulse raced and her blood burned inside her. The vein in her forehead throbbed, her face flushed red with fury. Worse. They've got all those provisions. Everything we stored, not to mention all the people I spent all that time evacuating. Everything we tried to keep them from, and just like that, they have it. We don't have enough supplies or equipment for a siege, but even I know if I try to withdraw, they can just chase me down. In a word, it was bad, and Remedios knew it was bad. Her brow furrowed as she tried to slog through her emotions to reach for the hopeful safe ground of solutions. But that was brought up short when she saw the least likely thing in the world. Is that her? Remedios did a double take. It seemed impossible, but from atop the wall of the city she saw a single-winged figure jump down and land in front of the gate. Remedios, Nia roared. Her voice filled the air as if it came from a dragon's own maw. Remedios. She called out again across the long divide between the two. Remedios. You killed a raven. I sought peace, you asked for war. Are you happy now you've got your way? A handful of orcs and I have your wall, your city, tens of thousands of humans building my city and my kingdom. Was that the trade you wanted? Naya yelled the taunt back at her one-time idol. Remedios fumed. Should we massacre you? Remember the wall? Or does a red stain on a stone remember that much? Naya taunted her again, and Naya smiled at herself. This is so damn petty. But I can't help but enjoy baiting this bitch. She briefly mused. You can't win. But how about I give you a shot at what you really want? Naya offered with a proud cry that was celebrated by the cheering of her demi-human army within the city. Come and get me. A duel. I win, your army surrenders. I lose, well I'm sure you know how it goes. Naya stretched out her hand and made a small come-hither gesture. Or are you afraid? Naya shouted out again, afraid to fight someone who isn't tied to a post? She could feel the hate pouring through her from where she could see Remedios on her horse. If she does nothing, her army's fighting spirit is as good as broken, and they're already in a bad spot even without knowing about my ambush. Naya could only smile with contentment and fall silent. Then she waited, and waited. The weight of the moment hung thick in the air. The army arrayed before fallen Kalincha was the majority of the army in the east. Anyone would be hesitant about losing it. Don't forget, we've still got your mother and father, Remedios shouted in a blind rage. Naya winced, but fired back, and I've got thousands of mothers and fathers. So what will it be? Remedios winced and seethed, a duel then. Agreed. Naya walked closer to Remedios' lines, stopping at the halfway point between the two. Remedios began to trot her horse forward. It cantered without fear, seemingly oblivious to the possibility of its death. Poor dumb animal. Remedios briefly sympathized and patted the horse's powerful pure white neck as she closed the gap between herself and the Queen of Frost. She stopped when she was 20 paces away. Her armor gleamed in the light. The tri-pointed symbol of Her Majesty stood out prominently on her chest. Her armored legs and arms looked no stronger than anyone else's at a glance. But Naya knew the truth. She's monstrously strong, always has been, but then, so am I. Naya bared her teeth, the sharp fangs replacing the ones she had what felt like a lifetime ago. You always were an animal, Remedios said as she put her helmet on her head and took up a straight stance holding her broadsword in front of herself. All the dragon did was reveal what was already there. Naya clicked her talons together and brought her wings in. I am what I am because you made it so. This is all you're doing, Remedios, she said while drawing an arrow from the quiver on her back. This, however, is the last time you'll be doing anything. The martial arts of both were activated so fast that nobody on either side was sure who was saying what. Greater agility boost. Fortress. True flight. Lesser strength. Flow acceleration. Lesser hardening. Ability boost. Naya loosed her arrows as fast as she could from her position, but Remedios was batting them out of the way with her sword, a cry of bloodlust in her throat, her eyes fixed on her prey, the armies of both commanders cheering their side on, but neither champion heard or saw anything but their own opponent. The arrows came faster, and Remedios began smacking them out of the way with her open hand as she closed the killing distance. She felt a sting in her knee as an arrow she failed to notice struck her squarely in the center, but she didn't even slow down, so close. Remedios cried out in her head as the promise of dragonid bloodshed loomed large in her mind. Naya avoided the strike, diving away, drawing more arrows, and loosing them as fast as before, striking at Remedios' arms and legs. The paladin screamed out her frustration, "Stop running." Naya only fired more, "Boost shot," she said, imbuing the arrow with some of her mana. The infuriated Remedios went to bat the arrow out of the way like before. To her, it all seemed to take place in slow motion. Her brown eyes widened, the arrow was glowing, coming at her like a shooting star. Her sword swept out to stop it, only for the arrow to go past. She felt it impact her helmet, and howled with pain. She saw the sky as she began sailing backward, her hand still clenching her sword. Her body arched as her helmet was sent flying, a crumpled, broken mess that rolled far, far away from the fight. The demi-human's cheers only egged Remedios on. "Damn you," she shouted when she felt the ground thud against her back and she finally slid to a stop. Naya's smile of triumph when her arrow hit, died on her face when she heard Remedios curse. Adamantite helmet. It has to be, she thought as the woman stood and dashed toward her with rage-fueled speed. The sword of the former head of the Paladin Order rose in a slash that would cut Naya from thigh to throat if it were allowed, and the Dragonid Queen jumped backward, releasing her bow. The sword cut through it, severing the string and the arch in one strike. A simple thing, merely a tool, but it belonged to Naya, and Remedios had broken it. The two could almost not believe it occurred. Naya stared down at it, dumbstruck for just a moment as Remedios picked it up and held it aloft like a trophy. Her soldiers cheered, while Naya's rumbled and raged. You think you disarmed me? No. Not even close. Naya snarled and charged forward. It doesn't matter. You're dead either way. Holy strike, Remedios yelled, and white light struck with Remedios's gesture of her blade. The pure white of the whitest clouds surrounded and hid Naya from view. That's it for you. It's over. It's over for you, you animal. The Paladin shouted, and then, as cheers went up from the humans and moans of horror from the demi-humans, Remedios took a step back in horror, for she heard laughter. Really? This is your trump card? That barely hurt at all, Naya said, and charged out of the light as it began to shrink and fade away, emerging from it as if she were born there. Naya's wings battered and drew her forward. Remedios began to swing her sword like mad, and Naya swung her claws. They battered against one another, deflecting blows, ducking and dodging. Naya kicked at Remedios' legs, particularly at the knee she struck before, sending Remedios briefly down to the injured knee. She shouted her taunt. Kneel to the claw of the Queen of Frost. Naya mocked. How did you not die? You're evil. Remedios shouted the question and shot up, using her forehead to strike Naya's nose and sending a spray of blood down to the ground. She burned villages and towns, destroyed the wall, invaded our country. She has to be evil? Remedios's mind went nearly mad from her confusion. No, I'm not. And I never was, Naya said as she and Remedios straightened up. You can fall knowing that you were wrong, Naya hissed out, wiped her face, and flew. Her wings carried her close to the woman, and Remedios' sword went up, and then came down to end it all. Naya caught Remedios' hand at the wrist, got her own feet under her in the nick of time, between the strike and stopping it. They were both stopped cold. The ground burst around them as they sank into it with the force of the blow. It felt as if the world cracked. Naya felt herself sinking down to one knee. Remedios was smiling, wild, fanatical. She put her other hand on the sword. Kneel before Her Majesty's symbol, animal. And it will be a quick death this time. Remedios grunted out. They shook. The struggle held them both fast. Both armies held their breath as they could feel the fight coming to an end. Naya stared up at Remedios, focusing the natural terror of her eyes on the woman. You have terrible breath. Remedios. Naya huffed, and it was such an off thing to say, that Remedios said nothing back to it. Her eyes widened however when Naya looked up at her and said, but mine is worse. She then exhaled, breathing frost into Remedios's face. The freezing breath began to blister the skin, turning it red, cracking it, breaking it, burning the Paladin with cold in her eyes, nose, cheeks, and even inside her mouth. Remedios howled at the sudden pain, tilting her head back, and Naya used the leverage of the momentary lapse to clench her taloned fingers onto Remedios' finger, ripping several of them free from the hand. The sword tumbled away to embed itself into the ground. She then jumped toward the staggering Paladin, and jammed her talons into Remedios' eyes. The pain lanced through the Paladin, tearing away the world of sight and leaving only the world of pain. She used her good hand to land a punch at Naya's torso, and it staggered the Queen of Frost back, but the pain and blindness were still present in the Paladin. Naya clutched her body for a moment. The bruises and cuts she had were all like shattered glass that was on fire. Her ribs, I think she broke 6 of them. The Queen of Frost realized, and clutched the injured place. She closed her hand up, and began to punch in return. Her blows hit like hammers against Remedios' face. The sound of crunching bones followed every strike as blood stained the scaled fingers of Naya's hand, and the Paladin finally went limp, falling onto her back. Naya swayed once. I think that might have torn more than I thought. Internal bleeding. This isn't good, she told herself, but raised her fist into the air. The demi-humans watching cheered the victory loud enough that the sky itself might have gone deaf from the noise. Naya's wings sprang out wide as she turned to the humans. She grabbed the limp and bloody head of Remedios by her brown and now very wet hair, and held the woman up. Surrender. Or join her. She then began to beat her wings, and flew back toward the city. A tiny groan from the unconscious woman revealed that life still hung by a thread, but Naya had what she wanted. I have my target, my prisoner, and my prize. At last. She thought with glee, and wondered as a mere afterthought, what Remedios' army would do, but to it the thought was added that, it doesn't matter, I've already won.